Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're going to be discussing this position. It is white to move and win the game. So you have a bishop, you have a pawn and pawn here, you're trying to make a queen, but the rook is going to be a problem because the rook can actually stop the pawn from promoting. So it is up to you right now to try to figure out the answer on how to successfully promote the pawn or one of the pawns, make a queen, and win this endgame. So pause the video to try to figure out the answer. Okay, hopefully you paused the video to try to figure out the answer. Now, if you thought about the very it's like an instantaneous move. You just think about it, which is like the move h7. But the problem with this move, it doesn't work the way that you want to. Because you might be thinking, well, he can just go back, the rook c8, stopping the pawn, and then all we can do is to actually play some kind of a, like bishop to b3, and then he can, of course, he should not be allowing us to put the bishop on g8, so he's going to go back, and yes, we can somehow trap him, but the king is too close to win the pawn. He will sack probably the rook for the pawn. He's gonna move his king. He's gonna push this pawn. It's going to be a headache for white. And whenever we move the bishop, we're gonna lose this pawn. So it's going to be lights out for white. So, of course, this push does not work. And also because there's a very fast way of actually winning the pawn. There's just a check on c3. We move the king and rook h3 to win the pawn whenever we try to promote. So it doesn't work. We cannot push the pawn right away. Now, honestly, the first move that comes to mind, that it came to my mind when I'm trying to solve this puzzle, I just instantly thought about the move King b4 because I knew that he needs this move to try to get behind the pawn to stop the pawn from promoting. So I thought, okay, what about King b4? King b4, I'm holding these squares that stop the rook from getting behind my pawn, and then in some way I can probably put the bishop on b3, push the pawn, put the bishop on g8, and make a queen. But the problem with this move, and why it doesn't work, because he can just simply play, for example, king g3. He's trying to get to the pawn, and you're like, well, he can just push. Well, actually, this is not a good move to push. You know why? Because of rook c8. Rook c8, we can never make the queen. If we wanted to play bishop c2, for example, it's a good trick. He can never take us because we're going to make a queen. Of course, he cannot do that. So what would he play? He would simply play rook to h8. We cannot defend the pawn unless we took the pawn on g6. But this is not winning because he can play g4, king g4, sorry, and then this pawn is going to be attacked. Whenever we move the bishop, we're going to lose this pawn, and it doesn't really work. But if we move the bishop here, it's not actually losing because I don't think black can take the pawn because there's this. But anyways, black can just simply take this pawn. The pawn will not move, and he's going to win it on the next turn. So that's why playing king b4 is too slow. It allows black to get his king active to start attacking our pawns. And unfortunately, bishop to c2 doesn't do much because after bishop c2, after the king moves, then bishop c2 trying to win the pawn, you can just take it and we push the pawn. It doesn't really help us in any way. So the first move in this position, and of course it is not some kind of a attack on the rook to try to get the bishop here, for example, because you cannot play bishop c2 to attack the pawn directly. So you might think about, okay, what about bishop f3, attack the rook moves, we play bishop to e4 to attack the pawn. Well, the problem with bishop to f3, there's rook c3 check. Whenever we move the king, we lose the game because after pawn here, we can go back and here and here, and he wins this is a winning endgame for black. So we shouldn't get into that. So now you might be thinking, okay, what the hell is the solution for this puzzle? Well, look, this is a tip for you in the endgame. If you have two pawns that are close to each other, but there's something between them, something that's stopping them from being together, like you want these pawns to push together in order to make a queen. Two pawns like this are unstoppable. So you have to do that. How can you make these two pawns walk together? You have to remove this pawn. You cannot remove the pawn by bishop c2 because that is just a free bishop. So you might have thought about the move bishop h5, sacrificing the bishop for something greater. Now, what is the point of the bishop to h5? Bishop to h5, we're trying to remove the pawn so that we're going to have two pawns pushing together. Remember, one rook can never, ever stop two pawns pushing together. It's impossible. One rook has to be sacrificed in order to stop one of the pawns. So it's not possible for black to actually win this. So after takes, you don't push this one. That's a blunder. You just play h7. And what I told you before, that the rook has to be behind one of the pawns in order to stop one of the pawns, but he cannot go rook h6 to stop the pawn because of our pawn. So he needs to go back to c8, we push g6, and there's nothing to be done. If he wants to push his pawn, for example, it doesn't really work because we have this, and we're going to make a queen on the next turn, which will not be really good for black, of course. We're going to make a queen here, he's going to take it, we're going to make a queen, and the king cannot move, so the king cannot go here to push his own pawn, and then all we have to do is play king, 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 king all the way there and checkmate the black king. So, but you might say, okay, this is a really good move, really sneaky move, but black doesn't have to take. Because if black takes, there's this push, and this is going to be losing for black. He can play, for example, king g3. Trying to get closer to the bishop, closer, very important to the pawn, to stop the pawns. But there's a move here, which is, pause the video to try to find it. I think it's a really simple one. And it is bishop takes d6, sacrificing the bishop. You might say, well, that is just a free bishop. Well, we can push the pawn to h7, and there's nothing stopping the pawn. You might say, well, no, you're wrong. There's rook a6 check, king moves, and there's rook to a8 stopping the pawn. Well, there is g6. Yes, the king gets closer, but you have this. Again, two pawns walking together, they are unstoppable. One rook cannot stop them. You can play some checks, but then you can just run back and get behind the pawns, push one of them, get the rook for the pawn, and this is a winning endgame. So it doesn't really work. So what after king? Okay, so after king g6, we have this bishop sacrifice. Okay, either king h3 or king g3 can just sacrifice and push the pawn, and this is going to be winning. Okay, what if he played something else? What if he played, for example, not takes, but rook c5, attacking this pawn? You don't have to care about the bishop or care about the pawn here. You have to push the other pawn to h7. Now he cannot take the bishop because he's going to make a queen. He cannot take this pawn because after he takes here, you can make a queen right away, but it's better for you to not do that. Because why would you lose a bishop on purpose? Just move the bishop to f3. You don't have to make a queen right away because whenever he puts the rook on h5, you can just take it, and the rook cannot stop the pawn from promoting. So you just have a piece, you're going to make a queen, the king will run there, and it will lead to some kind of a checkmate, or you can win the rook. Right? Right. So, after this move, rook c5, you push h7, you're trying to make a queen, so you're forcing your opponent to go all the way back to c8. Now, you can play bishop takes pawn. He plays king g3, and now there's a move in this position which is completely insane. Remember what I told you about the pawns has to move together in order to make a queen, because the bishop cannot in any kind of way help the pawns make a queen. The bishop cannot help because it is a light square bishop and this is a dark square, so it cannot help whatsoever unless we wasted a lot of time, which black will get closer and stop the pawns. There's a move here which is beyond imaginable. Pause the video to try to find it. And no, it is not bishop to f5. You're just attacking the rook. It's really doesn't help much. Okay, because he can play some kind of a check. The king will move. So after probably this check, king moves, king here. He goes there. I think it's still fine, I guess, right? Because after takes here, but yes, I think still fine. But there's a better way, a more beautiful way to actually win this, and it is because you want to make a queen. You play bishop e8, sacrificing the bishop. You're like, what the hell is this move? Black can just take it. Well, remember, we want two pawns pushing together. The king is too far of the pawn, so he cannot do anything. He can give us some checks, but we can just run. I mean, we can keep on running until we get behind the pawns. And when he gets really tired of this, we can just play, for example, g7 and attacking the rook. And the rook has to give away. It has to be giving away for one of the pawns, but then we make a queen, and then we win the rook. Now, there's one series of events, like here. Many of your opponents in the endgame, when they see these two pawns pushing, they know it's a losing game. So they resort to playing multiple checks at the endgame. So they keep checking you. You move the king, he checks you. You move the king, he checks you. And the mistake that you're doing, you're getting closer to the rook. So he plays another check and you attack him. And then you go here. And then black goes rook to h8. And you're like, okay, we push the pawn, we make a queen, come on. But then you blunder and it is rook takes h7. The pawn is pinned. So that's why whenever they try to annoy you with multiple checks, get behind your pawns. Do not attack the checking piece. Run behind the pawns and push one of them, and he will have to sacrifice the piece for one of them. Now there is some kind of a like, yes, there's king here, but then he can just sacrifice and he got a draw. So in order not to fall for that, never, after some checks, attack his piece. Just keep moving, moving, moving until you're safe from checks. And then you push and you make a queen. Very simple. Okay, so this was the solution of this puzzle, is to play, first of all, to remove one of the pawns in order to have two passers. And if they didn't do that, you can just push the pawn anyways, and you can sacrifice the bishop in order to have the pawns pushing together as well, and which will lead to a winning endgame. Tell me in the comments if you like this puzzle or not, and I'll see you again with another video.